We'll talk more after the film, and you have a chance to make your questions to John as well, but I'll ask one question before the film. Serial killers are very sort of iconic figures in popular culture and have been for 20 so years. But in 1985, when you started with this film, which was your first feature, there was nothing about serial killers in film industry, basically. Where did you get the idea to make a film about Henry?
Somebody gave me money to make a horror film. So, by a coincidence, I saw a TV show about Henry Lee Lucas, and I just said, okay, this is it. This is horrible. So that's how. $100,000 and a TV show. That's all you need.
Thank you. We'll talk more after the film. Welcome to the stage the director of the film, Mr. John McNaughton. I must ask you, what was the first reaction of the producers when they saw the film?
They hated it. They said, exactly, what have you done? You've made an art film. What are we going to do with this?
Any questions from the audience, please? Just raise your hand.
Did you like the movie yourself, or if you had a chance to remake it, would you change something?
I would pay the actors and the crew more. Aside from that, I wouldn't change a thing. I co-wrote it with a man named Richard Fire, who is still a friend of mine.
Please.
Did Michael Rooker got nuts? Did he go crazy during the production?
No, and no more crazy than he already was. Michael was very raw. Michael grew up in a very poor family in Alabama. And when he moved to Chicago, his parents divorced, and I hate to use the word, but his family were hillbillies, is what we would call them. And they were poor. And Michael managed to just, through force of will, get a scholarship to the Goodman School of Drama. And he was a trained actor and a good one, but he was still a very raw character. And when he went to this school, it was an expensive school to go to. And so he was sort of this hillbilly kid in with rich kids, and they looked down on him. But today, they bring him back. He's like their god now at that university. They bring him back, and they wine him and dine him, and he talks to these, So Michael's a very interesting guy, and he came from a very tough background. And one of the reasons his voice is like this, because when his dad moved he and Michael to Chicago, Michael's riding through this park in gang territory, and when he's like a little boy, 12 years old, and someone jumped out from and stabbed him in the throat. So Michael had a tough life, but now he's a movie star, so his life has turned out well.
The film was finished in 1986, but the first time you got it to theaters, it was 1919. What happened in the meantime?
Well, as I say, the people who put up the money to make the film hated the film. They thought no one would ever want to see it, and so they put it on the shelf. So I had to... Fortunately, they were a video company, so I could get video cassettes, and I would send them to critics. I would send them to other filmmakers. I sent them all over the United States, and so we got a screening at the Chicago Film Festival, and we got great reviews. Then we got a screening in a little tiny screening in New York, and a journalist from the Village Voice was there, and he wrote a full-page piece in the Village Voice and called it the best film of the year. And then it started to go to festivals and started to snowball. But it took years. It absolutely took years. And from the time it was done, from the time the picture was finished, I didn't make any money at all for a year and a half. I was living on credit cards, and I was living on the good graces of my cousin, who has since committed suicide. So it was a tough time. But I learned to fight. Well, I already knew how to fight, but I kept fighting, and it paid off.
More questions, please.
How easy or hard was the casting, and how did it went, the casting event and so on?
Well, it was interesting. We saw a lot of actors for Henry. because there's a great theater scene in Chicago, and there's a lot of really good actors working. And we were seeing these various actors. I remember one young man came in. We liked him. He was interesting, and he turned his nose up and said, "Well, I wouldn't do. This is beneath me. I'm an actor in the theater, so that's the last. I've never heard of him again." And we finally found an older actor who was very good that we thought we would cast for Henry. But there was no real sexual attraction, coming from him for the young woman. So we had a makeup artist who had directed Michael Rooker in a play, and he said, "Well, I know this guy. He's very rough around the edges. He's very raw, but he's a really good actor. And would you like to meet him?" And my co-writer, Richard Fire, came out of the theater, and he knew a lot of actors in Chicago, but he hated this makeup man. So anything this guy would say, he says, "No." I go, "Well, what do we got to lose? Let's meet this guy." So we asked Michael to come for an audition, and we were working in Richard Fire's apartment in Chicago, and there was a knock at the door, and I knew who it was, and I went to answer the door, and I opened the door, and there was Michael Rooker. And he was wearing the same clothes he's wearing in the movie, except for his shoes. We changed his shoes. And I just looked at him and I went, and I said a prayer. I said, "Dear God, let him be able to act, because this is Henry." Tommy Tolles came from Richard Fire's theater company, the Organic Theater. I don't know who knows who Stuart Gordon is, but he's a horror director who directed Reanimator and a lot of movies. And he was part of this group, and Tom Tolles, who played Otis, came from that group, and Tracy Arnold, who played Becky, came from that group. And there was just, everyone else mostly came from the theater in Chicago, but some of them were just my old friends who I knew were right for this particular, moment. So, it was not a real difficult casting process, but we were lucky. We were lucky to find Michael.
More questions? Please.
Can't hear. Louder, please.
Was anything cut from the script which you thought was too much, even for this movie?
There was a scene. It was cut from the film. It wasn't cut from the script. There was a scene where they were out killing somebody. Someone broke in the apartment and tried to rape Becky, and they came in and they found him in the midst of it, and they beat the shit out of him and threw him out the window. And it was just too silly, so we cut that out.
Please.
Me?
Yeah.
What's the relationship between you and the actors in this movie? Do you still see Michael and Tom? And
I still communicate. Well, I email Tommy at least once a week. He's living in Florida now. And Michael I saw 2 years ago in New York. I was there making The Harvest, and he was there doing press for Walking Dead. So we're still pretty good friends. I've kind of, Tracy moved out to Los Angeles against my advice right after this movie. I told her she had a theater career going. In my opinion, she should have kept it going until she got up to a point where if you go to Hollywood, it usually turns out badly. But if they come to you, it usually turns out pretty well. And she went to them, and it didn't turn out well for her. And I haven't seen her for a while. So, but yeah, Tommy and Michael, I'm still, communicate with some frequency.
Henry played a role in changing the censorship system and getting rid of the infamous X rating. Can you tell a bit about the process with putting Henry to MPAA?
Well, I learned a lot. we sent this. When we found someone who would distribute the film, before you could distribute it, you have to get a rating. So we sent it. Then you send it to the MPAA, Motion Picture. I don't even know what AA stands for. Yeah, something. And they watched it, and I was waiting to hear, and eventually I got a call from this woman, and we found out we got an X rating, which means the movie is not going to get any theatrical. It's not going to go to. There was 20 theaters in America that would play X-rated movies. Basically X-rated theaters played pornography. So it wasn't a good thing, and I eventually, you ask, normally any other movie you would say, well, what can we do? well, and they can't tell you to cut something because then they would be censors, but they can say, we don't like these scenes, why don't you look at them, make some adjustments and send them back, and we'll tell you if we'll give you the rating you want or not. That's the normal process. In our case, I talked to a woman at the MPAA, and she said, Mr. McNaughton, I'm sorry to tell you, there's nothing you can do to this movie that will ever change the rating because we object to the overall moral tone. And that was it. And I was happy because I didn't have to cut the movie. Because the people that funded it, they would have cut it to shreds if they could have made another nickel. So this film, as you've seen it, I think it's the first time it's been shown in Finland and completely uncut. All right, this is the whole thing. So it's never been touched since 1986, except by censors in other countries.
More questions?
Who did the music and how did you find that?
There's a producer on there, his name is Stephen A. Jones, and we worked together on every film I've ever made. And to this day, we work together. And Steve played in rock and roll bands, and he was a drummer, and he knew a lot of musicians. And so music was, you know, I played in rock and roll bands in high school, but by the time we made Henry, I hadn't played music for a long time. So it was, he knew people, and he brought in two people. One is named Ken Hale, who I continue to work with on all sorts of things today. And the other was a guy named Robert McNaughton, who everyone said, you know, I've read a lot of reviews that, well, your brother composed the score. I'd never met Robert McNaughton before in my life. I suppose if you trace it back a few generations, maybe we're related in somewhere in the hills of Scotland. But those two guys, with Steve's participation, an interesting story. We had no money, but we found a recording studio in Chicago, brand new recording studio at the time, 24-track, really nice. But it was owned by a group of Christian rock and rollers. They built the studio, and we, you know, they were like flipped out. But they were really nice, and the price was really good. They were nice people. And when we finally finished, they said, well, why don't you guys come back and you know, something respectable next time, and we can continue working together. So,
please.
Okay, so what I found really interesting is it's not this basic based on true story film. It's more like based on what this guy confessed and afterwards retracted. And even in the very beginning, he's shown to be a deeply unreliable narrator. He's like, first I stabbed and then I used a baseball bat and then I shot or whatever. And it's not really this is what really happened. It's more like this guy is hallucinating what happened and who knows. So how did you choose to do this like really interesting way of telling the story when you have to sort of really play a slasher?
well, that was what was so interesting. You know, there was no internet at the time we made this movie, so we read magazines, there was various TV shows that had stuff about it. We gathered everything we could. And he would tell the story, every time he would tell the story about who he murdered and, you know, et cetera, he would change everything. It was like, and that's why it's, when she, my favorite part is when, I thought you said, I don't remember anymore. And I thought you said you stabbed her, I thought you said you shot her. He goes, you know, et cetera. He is completely unreliable, and he's, like most psychopaths, a liar. And as it turned out, no one ever will know. You know, you could pretty much bet that he did kill his mother and one or two others. And if he killed 250, 300 people or not, nobody knows. But it was to his advantage to confess because his life got much better. But it didn't matter. Everyone believed him. And I got accused by an American writer named Ron Rosenbaum. You know, all this story isn't true. And it's like, hey, yo, it's called fiction.
More questions?
How long was the production of the movie and how hard was it? How long the production of the movie was and how hard was it?
We shot for 28 days with no days off. But since none of us had really made a feature film before, it was a kind of a wild and fun experience. And 29 years ago, we didn't, like I say, the first movie set I was ever on, I was the director. So, the cinematographer shot a lot of commercials. He was really good, and the costume designer and the production designer had done a lot of theater. They were really good, but no one had ever really made a movie. So we didn't know that what we were doing was basically impossible. And we just attacked it every morning and worked till, you know, sometimes we worked 24 hours. We'd say, here's what we have to shoot today. And no one was in any unions, so we'd say, well, okay, it's 12 hours, you have to go home. And we just, this is what we have to do today. And, you know, one day we did shoot 26 hours straight and came, you know, went and slept 4 hours and came back and shot the next day. So, but it was a 28-day shoot with no days off.
Please.
Yeah, me again.
Yeah.
Hi. In real life, Becky was only 14 years old. Was there an early version where she was 14 years old in the movie too? Or was it originally thought that she was going to be an adult?
It was originally thought we would find a good actor.
Oh, okay.
You know, and we did. I don't think it mattered that much. I mean, the real Becky was like, you wouldn't want to see that person. I mean, she was like not particularly bright or had much going on in her life, and you know, you wanted a character that you could care about.
Some of the strongest scenes in the film are shot with the video camera. Was that something that you had in the script already, that, or something that you improvised while shooting?
It's something that I would say but it was my idea, that I stole. And stole it from Thomas Harris from Red Dragon. Except in the case of that story in the book, this was long before the movie was made. The murderer in that book was named Francis Dollarhide, and he worked in a film processing lab, and he would look at the home movies, and when he saw a family that sort of fit the template of the family that had adopted and abused him, he would travel and murder these people and then photograph it. And I thought, wow, that's really creepy. That's really, you know, I haven't heard about that anyway, so I thought, I'm going to steal that. Except by the time that we made Henry, there was home video, so we just notched it up from still photography to home video.
Watching back at the whole phenomena that came around the serial killers from the decades after Henry was released, what do you think about it? What do you think about the fact that serial killers are something equivalent of pop stars and can appear on TV shows like Dexter, and there's been dozens and dozens of films made about them?
Well, they've kind of become, left the realm of reality and moved into the realm of the boogeyman, you know, like Freddy. They've kind of moved in, Dexter, moved into the world of fantasy, and they've become sort of iconic. I don't know what else to say or think about it. You know, it was kind of a new, for most murders are committed between people that have known each other. You know, husbands kill wives, wives kill husbands, children kill their parents, et cetera, et cetera. But it was kind of a new phenomenon that people just randomly went out and murdered strangers. So, but I think it was something, you know, that was new to Western society, and since has become quite popular for whatever reason. More people do it than ever. Who knows?
More questions? On the back row.
Since then, there's been so many movies in this area, but back then, this was a really extreme film, I think, and I remember seeing it way back then, and it caused quite a furore in terms of what you shoot, you know, how you present what you present. And were you at all aware, before it got popular, of what you had in your hands?
I didn't know, you know, no one could tell, since we'd never just made a film or distributed a film or had any, but it was trying to do something extreme, because you get a chance to make a film and you're thinking, I want people to remember this so I can make another film. I want it to be noticed. But I remember in the home invasion scene, we did 2 takes, and after the second take I turned to there was only 3 crew people in that room, and I just turned to them and said, none of us are going to heaven.
Please.
There was much black humor in the movie. Was it intentional or not?
If you watch this movie 3 times, I think you'll find it's almost a comedy.
I watched it a second time and I thought it was comedy.
The first time it's not a comedy.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You have to watch it a few times. Yeah, there's a lot of humor of just how idiotic these people are and everything.
More questions? Okay, then I'll ask the last one. There's one interesting factor about Michael Rooker's character is that he is likable, even though he's so unreliable and keeps killing people. There's still something to like about him, while Otis, who he sort of drags along, is the real asshole of the film, so to say. Exactly. But was it your idea, even from the beginning, or something that you saw on Michael Rooker when he put out the performance in the casting, that there's something about him that you can like also, which makes everything a little bit more twisted?
Michael is nothing like this character. He's a very outgoing, friendly, gregarious guy, and he grew up. I don't know how many sisters he had. He's very good around women. Women tend to like him because he's very he had sisters, so he knows how to behave around women, and he is a likable guy, very likable. But the idea of the movie was to come into this movie, and right from the beginning, you know that he's a murderer. And, you know, there's no mystery; it's going to be revealed later. And then little by little, as you come into a movie, you're looking for who is the character I'm to identify with, who is the hero. And about 10 or 12 or 15 minutes in the movie, you realize it's Michael Rooker, and then you go, wait, and then it's really uncomfortable. I'm feeling sympathy for this murderer. And the Otis character sort of is a mirror of, you know, to reflect what's good about Henry, because Otis is just a beast. And that was one of the things that this movie was intended to do, put you into the head of this person and have sympathy for them and say, because normally in movies about people that do things like this, it's really clear from the beginning, this is the bad guy and we hate him. It's like, no, this is the good guy, and find a reason why he's like you.
Thank you, John. It's been a thrill having you here.